throughout the presentation today. All right, so let's get started. As I said, my name's Craig Klein. I'm the CEO of SalesNexus, and my background's in sales. I've been hiring and firing and training salespeople, first in the energy business and now in the technology business for over 20 years, and developing lead generation systems and business development campaigns. And I'm pleased to introduce you to our featured speaker today, Jim Wilkinson, the CEO of the Strategic CFO. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Craig. I'm glad to be with y'all.
Jim's going to bring a really unique perspective to this discussion that we've been having over the last several weeks. His background's in finance and accounting and private equity. Jim, you want to say a little bit about what the Strategic CFO does?
Well, yes. I've been consulting with companies generally 10 to 200 million for about the past 22 years. And what we do is work with entrepreneurs to help them grow their business. And we've been doing that successfully, and love the entrepreneur environment and love dealing with salespeople. They make us money.
And we're also joined by Forrest Cassidy, the CEO of LeadFerret.com. Welcome, Forrest.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks for having us.
And we'll talk in a few minutes a little more about LeadFerret. So also want to make sure everybody's aware, this is one in a series that started out as 5 webinars, now has been extended to 6 webinars. So next week, we'll be conducting the 360-degree view of the customer relationship for business growth, where we're going to really focus on how can your entire team leverage information about customers to increase revenues, increase profits, and keep customers for much longer. And then we've added another webinar coming up on the 20th of February, the 4 pillars of a sales messaging strategy that drives growth. So if you've attended the other webinars in previous weeks, you've heard Michael talk a little bit about the sales scripter. Well, he's going to get really in-depth on why things like value statements and being prepared with how you're going to overcome objections and qualifying questions are so crucial in a sales conversation, and how to develop those. So that'll be the 20th of February. So be sure and register for those other webinars. And just to kind of set the table, we started this series off with the Magic 5 of content-based email marketing that drives sales leads. So the entire concept here is creating an email campaign that will engage potential customers in your content, and when people get engaged with it, you using that information to target them as prospects, target them with your salespeople. And the way that system works, just to review for everybody, is you create a series of 5 emails that target the different pains that your company, your products and services address for your customers. And then you create a series of 5 qualifying questions so that when your salesperson picks up the phone and calls somebody that's clicked on one of those white papers or a download that was in your series of emails here at the top, the next thing they do is qualify them and make sure they're really a qualified prospect. And then they begin the sales process, where they start doing demos and proposals and presentations and site visits and all the things that you do as a salesperson, and also turn on another email campaign that's more of a frequently asked questions that's going to kind of grease the skids and help them move through the sales pipeline more quickly. So that's the concept that we've been working on here. And the previous webinars have been digging into how do we develop the pain? What are those pains that my company addresses for my customers? What are the appropriate qualifying questions? And today, we're going to get more into, okay, once a customer's become and engage with the salesperson and they're in the sales funnel or sales pipeline, how do we measure that? How do we forecast sales, and why is that important to the business? And that's why I'm so excited about having Jim to be part of this today. with his background in the finance world. To put a little finer point on the overall concept here in terms of prospecting for your business, that's where Lead Ferret comes in. You can go to Lead Ferret, especially if you're a Sales Nexus subscriber. You can go to Lead Ferret and search for contacts that would be good prospects for you and download 500 contacts per month into your Sales Nexus system at absolutely no additional charge. It's part of your Sales Nexus subscription, and it includes the email address. Forrest, you want to tell us a little more about Lead Ferret?
Sure, absolutely. Just to follow up on what you were just saying, Craig, so you get 500 free transfers into Sales Nexus per month. That's free with your Sales Nexus account. You even get that if you're a new Sales Nexus user. You get that in the first month, or even while you're running a free trial with Sales Nexus. But of course, that's not what you're limited to. You can definitely get more. You could transfer more records and download more records than that with our other premium options. But we have over 10 million business-to-business contacts with complete information, including email addresses and a lot more data. And it's all easily searchable online. Basically a great prospecting tool. Anybody in sales and prospecting, would basically be crazy to not be using at least our free version. I would just recommend anybody on the call who is not already a user, I know there are a lot of people who are already Lead Ferret users, to basically just go after this webinar, go to the site, create a free account, watch some of our tutorials, poke around a little bit. Again, if you're in sales, marketing, prospecting, recruiting, anything like that, and you'd be crazy not to be using at least our free version.
Yeah, I see a couple of people have just commented they see on my slide, I guess, SIC code, and they're wanting to know if you can do NACIS codes, which you can, right, Forrest?
Yes, you absolutely can. This is a really high-level overview. You almost couldn't think of something that you would want to search by that we don't have built into the system. So the NAICS codes, SIC codes, geography, radius from a given point, all kinds of stuff. And if you can't find a particular search tool that you're looking for on the site, let us know. Odds are it's there, and we just need to make it a little bit more visible.
Yeah, it is a very robust interface. We use it all the time in our business, and we love it. This next slide here is an example of the results of a search. And so you can select these contacts and then transfer them right into Sales Nexus and start sending out your content-based email campaign or calling on them or whatever it is you plan to do with them. So like Forrest said, you can create a free account today and get in there and experiment with it yourself. So please take advantage of that. Okay, so in today's talk, we're going to get into just the principle of sales forecasting and why it's important, not just from a sales point of view, but also from a business and finance point of view. What are the common problems with forecasting sales? What is a sales process anyway? And then how do you measure that process or the pipeline, and how does that help you improve your business? And then we're going to get into some examples and questions and a little teaser. Jim's going to help us walk through a spreadsheet that he's developed that they use with their clients to help them forecast sales. I want everybody to know this is the kind of thing you can do in Sales Nexus. Obviously, our solution makes that very easy, but you don't need a CRM to manage a sales pipeline. It just makes it easier. If you take away nothing from this webinar today, I hope it's that you need to start measuring your pipeline. And even if you only can do it on paper or in a spreadsheet, do that. And then when you're ready, you can upgrade to a more sophisticated system like Sales Nexus. Okay, so Jim, you and I were talking about this yesterday. How does a forecast get used? I mean, there's the obvious sales management stuff that I talk about all the time, tracking progress towards goals of the sales team overall and individuals, So how are my salespeople doing relative to their quota? It provides specific coaching tips, or not tips, but coaching points for sales reps. So when I was a sales manager in the energy business, I would run a pipeline report before I met with each of my reps, and I would just pick out one or two things that caught my attention and really dig into that with them. And you would learn a lot about their selling approach, their strengths and weaknesses, and whether or not these particular deals were really likely to happen. And it provides a benchmark to compare salespeople to each other, which creates a competitive framework. Nothing better than salespeople competing with each other to be on top of the heap. But there's all sorts of other benefits that a good sales forecast brings to a business that are more related to how you run the business at the ownership or executive level and the finance side of things. You want to comment on that, Jim?
Yeah, please, I would. The main thing is you got to keep in mind it's all about cash and cash flow. You've got to have cash to drive the engine. And so as an entrepreneur and their CFO, we're real concerned with not running out of cash. And the more you grow, the more cash you need. So doing projections of the cash position of the company in the next 30, 60, 90 days is crucial to making sure that you can grow as fast as possible. So why are projecting sales so important to the CFO? Well, the reason is that most projections fail because the sales projection is off. It's either too high or too low. And why is that important? Well, if it's too low, then you're not making your numbers, and that's obvious. But if it's too high, then you're not planning the resources and you're not running your business effectively. So the more accurate it is, the better you can run your business and plan your cash needs. Who uses this projecting sales? Bankers do. So often what I've been doing, in fact, recently, I've been doing a lot of financing for growth and everything, and people want to increase their line of credit. Well, what we do is, and we have a spreadsheet that we'll be happy to share with anybody. It's very, very simple. It's not as sophisticated as a CRM, but we'll give the banker, we'll go out and spread out our sales pipeline on a monthly basis for the next 12 months. And if we only have 3 months, that's fine. But some companies will have a backlog or at least projected sales for like half the year. Well, the more you have lined out and booked and can project out, the more the banker feels comfortable in being aggressive in loaning you money. And so the end result is for the entrepreneurs online is you can grow faster and close more sales because you have the money and liquidity to execute. So that's a big benefit.
Yeah, and we're gonna look at that spreadsheet in detail here in a little bit. I guess after you and I spoke yesterday, Jim, I was thinking about this, and you just kind of put it in a different perspective. One way or the other, if your sales forecast is off, then your profits will go down, right? Because either you're going to allocate too much resource based on a overly rosy forecast, right? So you're going to have a higher than necessary staff and inventory and other expenses, right? And if you don't achieve that sales forecast, then you're going to end up upside down and, profits are down. Or you under forecast and then you end up under resourced and you can't capitalize on the opportunities that you have, and so you end up with lower profits. So either way, inaccurate sales forecast leads to lower profits, right?
For the most part, yes. And, if you underestimate your sales and you're out of cash or you're in a cash bind, all of a sudden you can't close the sales as quickly or operation starts not executing. And for a salesperson, delivering on what you promise is key.
Right.
I want to add something, if I may, Craig.
Sure.
There's a Harvard professor in marketing who says, he quotes, "It's all about sales. The rest are just details." And for a financial person, it's all about sales for me. If I don't have a good sales force, if I don't have a client that can generate sales, then as a CFO, I can't make you more profitable if you can't generate sales. So projecting sales to me is key to being able to help you make money.
Right, right. Yeah, and, you know, as a sales manager, to me, the magic ingredient has always been to break down the process that leads to sales. I learned early in my career that, you know, it's difficult to manage salespeople if all you know is what they sold. You can't really, they're not in control of that ultimately, right? The customer's in control of that. What they're in control of is the actions they take that lead to that order. And that's what a sales process is, right? So this is kind of just a really simple example. Cold calls or emails go out, and from those initial connections that are made, you set appointments, and you go and you do presentations, and from that you do proposals, and then you start closing. You know, once you start measuring those discrete steps in the process, then you have an entirely different perspective on what your sales are going to ultimately be. In other words, eventually you get to the point where you can say, well, last month we made, you know, X number of cold calls, and based on previous month's performance, that ought to mean that this month we're going to sell Y, you know. And that's very empowering for salespeople too, because now they don't have to show up every day stressed out about which customer is going to buy. They just got to show up every day and make their cold calls. Then you also start finding where things get stuck. You know, you may find that you're making all your cold calls and you're setting a lot of appointments and you're doing a lot of presentations, and then you send out proposals and things just never move past that. Very few go from proposal to order, right? Well, that's very powerful information, because what that tells you ultimately is that you're not doing a very good job of qualifying, or you're not establishing the value of your product before you do a proposal. And if you know that, then you can add a step in here somewhere where you're going to better qualify, better establish the value. And what it does is it lets the salespeople spend less time with unqualified prospects and more time finding other ones and closing the ones that are qualified. And that can be a really radical shift in your sales pipeline. So, in fact, last week, Michael Halper presented how to qualify a prospect. And he made some really great points that I just wanted to kind of summarize. The biggest one is really just that salespeople only have a limited amount of time. You know, in a lot of organizations, the salespeople are compensated, you know, based on performance. So on one level, they have all the incentive in the world to work as hard as possible, right? But there's still only so much time in the day, and in a B2B world, your customers are only available during certain windows of time for the most part. So you need to maximize the time you spend with prospects that have a high probability to purchase, right? You can't really control entirely whether or not you talk to highly qualified prospects. You can control which ones you spend a lot of time with, and that's really the magic of qualifying. When you ask good qualifying questions, you start to uncover what their pains are, you know, how your product's really going to benefit them. That helps you establish the value, and it helps you build a better relationship with the customer, build strong rapport when you really understand them. So that's crucial. And just so everybody knows, that webinar is on our website, and you can go watch a recording of it if you missed it last week. So in your sales pipeline, in your sales process, what should you measure? That's a really broad question that's going to have very different answers depending on the business you're in. You know, I just kind of put sort of an example. Obviously, you want to measure how many leads are coming in or leads you're generating via cold calls or other outbound activities, and then how many are meeting some level of qualification. You got to define what that is. What are the objective things that you can measure about a customer or ask them that make them qualified, and how many of them, once you engage with them, meet that. And then how many of the big things are you doing, like proposals, presentations, appointments, responding to RFPs, things that consume a lot of your time. Obviously, you want to measure those things.
Craig, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
And maybe someone else has the same question, but how many steps do you usually see people measuring? 4, 6?
That's a great
8?
question.
What?
I don't think there's any secret sauce there. I think it just depends on your process. Although there's a keep it simple, stupid principle, right? I mean, honestly, for most organizations, I think if you get anywhere beyond 3, 4, 5 things that you're, crucial steps in the process that you're trying to measure, it starts to get a little complex. Because remember, what the difficulty with this is that we're trying to measure a process unfolding that we're not really in control of, right? The customer is. This is our sales process, the things that we do, but what really matters is what the customer does, their buying process. So a lot of times that's a great way to narrow that down and answer that question, Jim. What are the steps that the customer typically goes through, and can we marry that with the steps that we're taking? But I think you want to keep it pretty simple. Would you agree?
Yeah, when I was doing it manually, and that's one of the things that if you do it with a spreadsheet, you want to keep it. I had 3 steps for our business. We get 99% of our business until recently from referral, and then we'd have a meeting, and then we'd make a proposal or engagement letter. And so I track the close percentage by those 3 steps, but I didn't. I wanted to make it more sophisticated, but it was laborious.
Right. Yeah. It just gets complex. So some other things that you can measure that, again, depending on the business you're in, I've recently worked with a couple of companies that are in a more, let's just say, a more competitive environment than a lot of B2B situations, maybe more on the consumer side, and they measure things that are indicators of their performance. So like, what was the response time to this incoming lead? What was our average response time? I've seen businesses that have really correlated that to sales performance. So in other words, if for whatever reason for a week it takes us an hour to respond to an incoming lead, but then the next week it only takes us 15 minutes, they can see a direct correlation in sales results. That faster response leads to better sales. Or event attendance. If you do trade shows, or you do sort of seminars or other networking type events that you're putting a lot of energy into promoting and inviting people to and things like that, obviously the number of people that show up there is an indicator of future performance. So that can be the type of thing that can be measured as well. Incoming calls, just as a raw number, can be a strong indicator, or downloads of your white papers and things like that. Sorry about that, everybody. Forgot to turn off my phone. Clicks on emails, right? If you go to LeadFerret and you download your 500 contacts that are targeted contacts, and you've created a really powerful content-based piece, 5 things to ask before you buy a widget, whatever it is you sell, and you send it to the right people, then the number of people that read that article, that tells you a lot about what's happening at the very top of your funnel, or sort of the beginning of your pipeline. Okay, so Jim, you just mentioned this really. The close rate is the percentage of opportunities that enter the pipeline and then close. But you want to compute that based on in various different ways depending on the business. You mentioned a minute ago computing the close rate based on the number of engagement letters versus initial appointments and that kind of thing. Any thoughts on sort of the insights that come from looking at that?
Well, the way I did it for our business and then later did it for our clients is I would take the number of referrals and divide it by the actual sales close. So, for example, 25% of our referrals we would close. Then I took the meetings, and we would generally have a first meeting and then have a second where we give them an engagement letter. Well, that first meeting, I think we closed, I want to say it came up to about 50%, and then we closed 70% of the people we had engagement letters. Now keep in mind these are pretty high because they were very strong referrals from bankers or CPAs or attorneys. But when I went to project sales, having that percentage and knowing my referrals that were outstanding with a guesstimate of value, with the meetings, and with the engagement letter, I could then take that and project out mathematically what percentage of those would close and kind of extrapolate my sales income stream.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that if you're doing a lot of internet-based marketing and sending traffic to your website and converting leads on the website, one of the things that can really be misleading is the volume of leads coming through the website. I've learned this the hard way myself, and I've seen a lot of other clients wrestle with it. You may start a new advertising campaign online, a banner ad running on some site, or maybe it's just a pay-per-click campaign. And sometimes, for very counterintuitive reasons, you can drive a lot of traffic to your site and you can drive a lot of conversion of leads, but those leads won't be highly qualified leads. And so what happens is your salespeople start to look very busy, but then ultimately they don't close a lot. And if you have a long sales cycle or a multi-step sales cycle, that can really get you in trouble. You can cover your salespeople up with leads that they can't close very well, and you don't really know what's happened for maybe weeks or months. So that's why I put on here measuring the close rate as a percentage of total leads versus a percentage of qualified leads is really important. Knowing how many of the leads are just getting disqualified, that's going to help you optimize your advertising spending, and in a lot of businesses, that's a really big part of your monthly expense. Then also, in businesses where you have multiple different product lines or maybe even different industries that you're targeting, looking at the big deals versus the small deals. You might have kind of like Jim just described. Jim, you might have really high close rate for those referrals that are really strong opportunities, but then you may also have people coming through your website and have a really low close rate there, and that tells you something, right? But it's also really important from a forecasting point of view because you need to know, you may need to differentiate those things when you put together a forecast. So,
Craig, if I can interject, one of the other times we did this for a client, we did it based on product and by salesman by division. And so different divisions, like you said, this had a like a 6 to 12 month delivery process. They would have a backlog of 6 to 12 months, and depending on some divisions were more of a 3 to 6 month, and some were more 6 to 12. And so depending on which division you were in, you had a different close rate, and you had a different timing as to when the sale was fulfilled.
Right.
So there's really an art to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're describing a situation that's even more complex, because once a deal is closed, it still may be months before you're actually booking the sale from a revenue point of view, because you have to manufacture and ship and so on.
Exactly.
Well, and so some of the things that typical things that you'll learn from going through this process is, you might have a lower profit margin on certain types of deals. Like Jim said, maybe a certain product or a certain size of deal, maybe in different territories is another way to look at it. Or you might have a higher profit margin on different products or things. And you also may be able to tie it to the source of the lead in the advertising that you're doing. So you might find that the trade show brings you tremendous opportunities, big tickets, and high profit, which is great, of course. And you might find that your internet marketing is bringing you smaller opportunities that are lower margin. So that tells you a lot about where you should spend your advertising. Not trying to pick on internet advertising, but depending on what your advertising mix is, you'll start to see the differences and how to optimize that investment. So what we're really talking about here is the sales pipeline. For most companies, it tends to be managed as a closed system. Leads go in and they go through the pipeline, and revenue comes out the other end. And the problem with that is that if you only know what comes out the other end, you really have no ability to adjust or compensate or do anything about it, other than let's just go get more leads. And of course that can cost a lot of money in terms of advertising and marketing, or maybe you got to hire another salesperson. There's an investment there. There's no way, really, no data to optimize what happens with the leads that go into the sales pipeline if you're not measuring what happens while they're in there. So when you do, you're going to start to learn why opportunities stall and where. Your sales pipeline really looks like this, right? It's not a closed system. Not everybody that comes into the sales pipeline closes. If they do, then I want to hear from you afterwards. Most businesses are lucky if they do, 20, 30% close rate. So you got a lot of leakage coming out of your pipeline, and you need to know why that is. What is it what's the trigger that causes people to stop in the pipeline or leave the pipeline? Real common examples after the proposal, are they just getting sticker shock? Did they not really fully understand what type of investment they were looking at, and they see the proposal and they just go, oh wow, I can't do that. If that's the case, then have you before that really established why that investment is a healthy one for them? Maybe the proposal's coming too early in the process. Maybe you need to do a few other things before you get that in front of them. That's a real common sales mistake. Salespeople are sort of anxious to get the order, and so they'll jump forward to things like proposals that are that should be nearer the end of the process. Or if you're in a business where you do demos or presentations, are you running around and spending a lot of energy demoing to unqualified prospects? If you are, what you'll see is leads come into the pipeline, and then as soon as they have the demo, they never go any further, or very few of them move to that next step. Or are we getting the wrong people in the demo, or we don't have the decision maker in the demo? Is the budget ROI case not clear? Have you established before or during the presentation why the investment is going to impact and improve that business. So these are the kind of eye-openers that will come out of measuring your sales pipeline. And then you can start to think about, what can we do about this? And, this can all be extremely powerful. Jim, I don't know, you might have some examples, but, I've seen situations where without hiring any salespeople, without investing in any new marketing or advertising campaigns, a business is able to make some adjustments in the process and increase revenue, by 10% or more in just a few months.
Well, Craig, when we're working with clients, we say that there's 3 ways to improve profits and cash flow. One is procurement, which means cutting costs, which anybody can do. The other is pricing, which sometimes it's difficult to adjust pricing in a market. But the third, and we call that a silver bullet, is managing productivity. And we call it a silver bullet because you don't have to cut costs or lay off people, and you don't have to change prices. You just need to get more done with the same resource. So what you're saying here right now is, if I can improve my close rate, I can increase the productivity of my sales force.
Right. That's exactly right. Yep. So, excuse me. So, once you get started with this, I think it's important to just kind of give everybody a warning. Don't react immediately to the data that you start to see. You need to assume that it may take some time to get accurate data. You need to understand that sometimes it'll take a while to sort of average out. And you don't want to overreact too early. You want to kind of get a feel for the benchmarks. You may instinctively feel like your salespeople just aren't making enough cold calls or developing enough new prospects. And you sort of have a desired result already in mind. You want the data to show you something, like they're not making enough calls and you need to set a higher expectation there. But I would caution against that. I would let some time go by and let the data make your case for you. Share it with the team and let them see what's happening with the data. You want to, then project the sales, kind of like you talked about earlier, Jim, based on each salesperson should have their own projection, especially in businesses where you have a lot of, manufacturing costs or, variable costs based on the product and service that you're offering. You want to forecast it in that way, by territory and size of opportunity, like we talked about earlier. And then within each of those categories, you might actually develop different measurements that you're doing.
Craig, I'd like to add something. I'm looking at this title. It says reliable forecasting. And my experience when I did this manually with the spreadsheet, I did it for a 6-month period. I never went back and did it again. And that's where, and we're going to talk about this later about automating this, but that's where we made the decision to go with Sales Nexus to automate this, is because as a management tool, you can see trends, sooner. And, I just think this reliable comment is very important in watching the trends and reacting to them in a month to 6-month period versus doing it, sporadically.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's back in my energy days, that's when the magic really happened for us from a pipeline management point of view, is when we got in the habit of looking at the pipeline every week and sitting down with each sales rep every week and everybody's attention getting focused on that. We started getting a lot more accurate data from the sales rep. And it just all kind of got dialed in because we were all paying attention to it. And you can't make it a, once a year or twice a year type of exercise. Okay, so let's pull up that spreadsheet, and my bad, I didn't get that ready ahead of time. But there it is. Talk us through this, Jim.
So what we did here, and everyone's different for each client, but one, you have existing sales, what you're trying to do is build your monthly revenue for the next 12 months, 6 to 12 months. And so you start off with existing booked sales, and you know what they are, and you know who the salesman is. And so the probability of them closing in column D is 100%. And then you go down to the prospects, and this becomes more of, if you do not have a good CRM and you don't have any tracking statistical, it's a guesstimate. And so we just stuck in 90%, and if you'll see somebody said 25, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't give you a lot of warm and fuzzies. If I have good statistical data that I can say that I've got a 87% chance of closing, I feel a lot more confident in that data than 90%. It seems kind of like a swag. But it is better than nothing, and especially when you're talking to a bank, they'll look at the opportunity, and they'll ask you about individual opportunities. And so then you'll need to be able to talk to them. And we did it by salesman. We've done it by product line. We've done it by I did my company by the steps in the sales process, but I wasn't sophisticated enough at the time to break it out in a different manner, whereas now there's several of us selling, and I couldn't manage it on a spreadsheet like this. But we did this for a $30 million company that was manufacturing large equipment, and so what you would do is you take that probability, and then you do it based on the dates that you expected to close, and so you would say 90% of the total probability is going to close in June. You would then put 90% of that number in June. So it's better than nothing, but it's not as sophisticated as perhaps an automated system would be.
Well,
but bankers do like it.
Why is that? Why do they like this?
Because most entrepreneurs, they take last year's sales and they multiply it by 20%, 120%. And you go, well, why do you think that? Oh, we're just going to grow. But when you can identify unique opportunities, and let's talk about this. Say you only have a fourth to a half of your sales identified. Well, what you then do is down at the bottom, you'll have a kind of a unidentified sales line item. So, for example, say you're going to do $10 million in sales and you've only identified 5. Well, then you may have down at the bottom a unidentified sales number that would, you may call it new business or whatnot, that hasn't been specifically identified. But if I can specifically identify my sales for the next 3 to 6 months, don't you think that I know what I'm doing?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Bankers have a lot more confidence in someone that can give them, and especially when they start asking about, well, tell me about this deal, that deal. Banking's all about confidence in the company, because they're taking a risk with you.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So what you're saying here is that you're saying to the banker, look, I know I'm very confident about this percentage of this projection. So we're projecting 25 million, and I'm basically saying that I've identified specific opportunities, and when that revenue is going to come in for whatever it is, 20 million of that, and I'm expecting 5 million to come from some new growth strategies that we have. So that's a lot better than just saying, well, we think it's going to grow.
Right, and once again, bankers know that the sales projections is the weakest link in the financial projection, and everything is driven off of that number.
So this is, it's a fascinating conversation to me, because being in sales management most of my career, I've been kind of on the other end of this equation, right? I'm the one responsible for ultimately preparing this data for management, and I get a lot of pushback from the sales reps a lot, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to spend a lot of time on it, and then I'm going to be held accountable by my management for hitting these numbers. So it's a really difficult dance. Anybody that's ever tried to do it knows that it's very stressful and high pressure. And I love the way that you're breaking out the unique opportunities. I was going to ask you on the probability here. What do you think about, like, if you've identified your sales process and you know that there's these 3 or 4 steps in the process? What do you think about assigning a probability to the opportunity based on what stage they're at in the pipeline?
I think that would be a better way to do it. This template I took it from a real life example of a company, and they were just sitting there telling me, as we're trying to go with the bankers, they had gone through this past recession and were coming out of the recession and trying to grow their sales, and they were asking the bank for more money. And the bank was going, okay, y'all just had losses the past couple of years. You're now starting to make money, and you want to double your line of credit. Why? And so they had all these opportunities in their head, but they didn't have them on paper. So we took this template to lay it out on paper. But I think a preferable way to do it would be by stage, and especially if you could back it up by statistics. This worked. We got the loan, and they were able to grow, and they had a great year, and they've been doing fine thereafter. And they don't do this every year like they should, but at that point, it was the difference between growing sales 30% versus 10.
Right. Well,
the other thing I want to say, Craig,
yes, sir.
Like I said earlier, if I know, I have a lot more confidence if I know that it's 87% versus 90. If I know it's 87%, I somehow think, and especially if you can document that you've statistically proven up this number, then I'm gonna have a lot more confidence in you as a manager,
right,
versus just, hey, I guessed it at 90%.
Well, and everything that you're saying is true at the salesperson and sales manager level too, right? I mean, in other words, I can sit down with my sales guy and say, how much you expect to sell next quarter? And they can give me some kind of a WAG, right? And a lot of organizations, that's about all they do. But if I can sit down with a salesperson and he can walk me through his own list of opportunities with his own probabilities or probabilities assigned by the system or whatever, but anyway, the details are there, I'm going to be a lot more confident about it. Good, bad, or indifferent, right?
Right.
I might see that, wow, you're really not on track to hit your quota. Well, I'd much rather know that now than 2 quarters from now, because I can do something about it. We can say, why don't we have more opportunities in the pipeline? Whereas if you don't have a way to look at it in this detail with the salesperson, they're going to tell you what you want to hear. They know their quota is $500,000 for the next quarter, so he's going to tell you, yeah, I think I'm going to sell probably between 475 and 525. And then you wake up 3 or 4 months later and you realize you missed it by 150,000, and it's too late. Okay, so let's get back to the slides here. Bear with me a sec, guys. Got to make my computer work for me again. Okay, there we go. So I included here a couple of little examples from Sales Nexus. This is a forecast report that's available in Sales Nexus that we've just added to the system here the last few months, and people really seem to like it. what it does is it takes, it's only going to work for you after some period of time of using the system, probably about 6 months. So you add in your sales opportunities, and then over time you go and you mark the sales opportunities as either closed lost or closed won. And what the system does is it computes a historical close rate. You can see that down here. So for the past 6 months, of every opportunity that you've set up, 18% of them have closed. So next month, you've got 231,000 in opportunities in the system. So we're going to take that 18% and assume that your sales are actually going to be 42,000, if that makes sense. So it's using past performance to estimate future results.
Hey, Craig, will it tell you how long your sales cycle is?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a different report, but yeah, sure. Average between, you can look at it from when did that lead get put into the system at all, and then when did we close? Or you can look at it from the standpoint of, when did we have our first meeting or first demo or, some other type of action.
Powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to spend $100,000 on advertising, and we expect $500,000 in sales to come from that, but it's a whole other thing to be able to say, and that will happen, within 6 months. And then also, I just wanted to show everybody, once you've figured out what your sales process is, you can create it in a system like SalesNexus as a campaign so that it really keeps the sales team focused on those steps. So what you're seeing here is a series of tasks that are spread out in time, a number of, so if I schedule this for my new lead today, then 5 days from now I'm going to get a task on my task list saying schedule the demo. So that's the way that works. So it schedules all this up front, and you can see in this case I've got an email going out in between each step to kind of, help educate the prospect and so on. So that's the kind of thing you can do in SalesNexus. But the point is, by doing this, it's going to lead the salesperson down the right path. They're going to be reminded to do the next step, not to just make a follow-up call sort of, without any specific objective in mind. They'll know I'm calling to schedule a demo. I'm calling to gather their requirements so that next I can prepare a proposal, etc. But then also, once you've done that, what this lets you do is measure all that, right? I can then go back and say, you know what? We had to call an average of 3 times to get the demo scheduled. That's pretty powerful information. And it took us between when we conducted the demo and when we actually sent them a proposal, usually was 30 days. That's really powerful information. By canning the process into the system, now you can measure it any way you want to, really. And that just helps illuminate all of these questions that Jim and I have been talking about today. Before we wrap it up here, we're getting right to the top of the hour. I just wanted to remind everybody, first of all, next week we're going to be talking about creating a 360-degree view of the customer relationship for your entire team. And then the week after that, the 20th of February, Michael Halper is going to be back with us to talk about core sales messaging and what's important and knowing how to say the right things to your prospects and customers. And he's going to revisit some of the topics we've already covered in previous webinars, understanding their pain, qualifying. And in those webinars, he's talked about the sales scripter, and we're going to dig into that in detail as a part of that webinar on the 20th. So If you want to see how you can use the scripter to develop your qualifying questions, your voicemail scripts, your follow-up emails, and everything else that the scripter does, join us on that February 20th webinar for that. Again, next week, 360-degree view of the customer relationship for business profits. So that's the 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can register for that at salesnexus.com/resources/webinars, and there'll be an email going out tomorrow where you'll get a link to the recording of today's webinar, the slides, a link to register for this webinar, and a couple other things. One of those will be Sandra's email here. Jim, what does everybody have to do if they want to get a copy of that pipeline spreadsheet?
Well, if you'll just email Sandra Watson at our office and tell her that you were attended the Sales Nexus webinar, so she knows who you're with, she'll know to send you, and if you would like a copy of the spreadsheet, she'll know which spreadsheet to send you, and we'll be happy to email anybody that wants one.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valuable. As I said early on, for all the reasons we've talked about here today, you need to start forecasting sales and measuring your pipeline. If you don't have a Sales Nexus system or some other type of system that does that, makes it easy, then start doing it with a spreadsheet. And Jim, I think it's great that you're willing to share that spreadsheet with everybody. So we'll include Sandra's email in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow so everybody can get in touch with you guys. And just a reminder for everybody, Forrest touched on this earlier, you can start a free 30-day trial of Sales Nexus today. You can upload your own list via an Excel file or from Outlook and other sources, but you can also go to LeadFerret. You can start a free account there and download 500 contacts that you choose in LeadFerret with their email addresses right into Sales Nexus. You can go into Sales Nexus and create your templates and campaigns and start sending out emails during that free 30-day trial, up to 50,000 emails every month you can send. Start generating yourself some leads and closing sales. So be sure and get that started today. And again, you'll get an email with a link to start the free trial, as well as get in touch with Sandra and register for next week's webinar. So that brings us to the end. Jim, if you got a few more minutes, there's a couple of questions that I wanted us to be sure and touch on that have been asked a few times here.
Okay.
And one of them that a few people have asked is, why is it important to measure the size of the opportunity?
You mean like in dollar amounts?
Yeah, that's what we've been referring to, I think.
Yes, because the size of the opportunity is key in driving the dollar revenue that you're going to report to the bank or to the owners. So if I have a $10,000 opportunity and I have a $100,000 opportunity, the $100,000 opportunity is going to mean more to me for profits and cash flow and everything than the 10.
Right. Yeah, and you know, from a sales management point of view, what I've seen happen a lot is salespeople can get really locked and loaded on a big opportunity. They think they've got a $500,000 deal cooking with a particular customer, and the next thing you know, they're living over at that guy's office. Well, what you have to ask yourself is not just how big is that opportunity, but where is it? And should we really be investing that kind of time in it? Is it really that likely to happen? Or, of course, the flip side could be true as well. You might find that some salespeople are tremendous at knocking those homers out of the park. Obviously, they probably don't do as many as some of the smaller deals. And other salespeople really have trouble with the bigger deals, don't do very many of them, but they do a lot of singles every month. And there's power in that information. And let's see, another question that was asked here. There was a few people that were asking about, the at what point is it appropriate to start tracking an opportunity? I think that's really a crucial question here. You know, do we take every lead that comes in from the website and start putting it in that spreadsheet?
Well, let me tell you what we're doing, and there's about 4 of us now involved in various sales of different products. And as soon as a lead comes in, an inquiry even, we start tracking that. So for me, and I'll be curious to see what you said, as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really just a matter of how difficult or you know, administratively laborious is it to do the tracking, right? If you're using a spreadsheet, somebody's got to go in there and type it in there, and then you've got to update it every week or month or whatever's appropriate. And that can seem time-consuming. It's probably worth it in any case, but that's where obviously a system that can automate that comes into play. But the sooner the better. What I have said to many customers is, you know, maybe it's appropriate in some cases to qualify the lead first and then track the ones that meet your minimum level of qualification. And that limits the number of, you know, individual deals that you're tracking in that spreadsheet type of thing.
And you know, as you mentioned that, when we were doing everything manually, we probably did more what you said right there.
Yeah.
And just track the ones that we had the best shot of closing. But now we're putting everything and we're documenting it as soon as there's an inquiry or referral.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if it's all in a system that analyzes all of this for you, then there's really no reason not to, right?
Exactly.
Well, okay. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So, again, you'll get an email tomorrow with links to register for next week's webinar, a link to start your free trial Sales Nexus and start your free Lead Ferret account, a link to get in touch with Sandra and Jim to get a copy of the spreadsheet, and a few other things. But before we go, Jim, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's really been powerful. I really appreciate all your insights.
Well, you're welcome. I enjoyed it.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. And